Texans defensive lineman, a recent free agency acquisition, was suspended by the NFL for 6 games. It was announced today. He'll be suspended without pay for the first 6 weeks of the 2024 regular season for violating the PED policy. He may participate in all preseason games, practices, and games. He'll be eligible for reinstatement in week 7. This is a big blow for the Texans. It's not the end of the world because of the depth that they have on the defensive line and the other additions they had made, but he's a forceful, impactful playmaker. And it's certainly not nothing. Denico issued a statement. He says he was surprised. He's never tested positive before, despite the many, many tests that NFL players take in his 10-year career. He included in his statement this: I immediately investigated the matter and discovered that a pharmacy to which my doctors submitted a prescription for a different medication had, whether intentionally, recklessly, or negligently, included a banned substance. I want to be clear, at no time did I know or even suspect that this medication contained a banned substance. Now, we've heard statements like this before, and the hard thing about it is that it could be completely true, but unfortunately, because it could be completely true, people have used that and claimed it when in fact they did intend. My first inclination is that a guy that's been in the league for 10 years at the very least has probably not relied on using PEDs to get to where he's gotten. So he's probably going to be just as good a player when he gets back in week 7. But the NFL policy is very firm about this. You're responsible for what goes into your body. And in the somewhat unregulated supplement industry, it's not unheard of for there to be tainted supplements. There are also doctors out there who are not familiar with the NFL policy and don't educate themselves like they should. So there have been cases where doctors have prescribed a player a substance that isn't steroids or a growth hormone or a peptide, but yet might be an estrogen blocker or something else that's treated like it's a steroid when it comes to the drug policy. Largely, though, that just doesn't matter. So there's very little recourse. One of the only successful instances of a player getting out of a suspension was when Texans offensive tackle Dwayne Brown was able to prove that he had eaten beef in Mexico that was tainted with clenbuterol. And the difference being there that he could prove that it wasn't a supplement that he took. When you take any kind of nutritional supplement that hasn't been tested beforehand, you're taking a risk as an athlete. And sometimes athletes trust doctors and their white coats and their fancy degrees a little bit more than they should. But when it comes to the Texans and where their football team stands right now, that's neither here nor there. We know that Denico calls the defensive line the engine of this defense. And because of that, they went out in the offseason and they loaded up a whole lot of depth, presumably because they were worried about injuries and because they like to rotate their defensive linemen in. But that potentially very fearsome Texans defensive line is going to be a little bit less fearsome for the next 6 weeks. What many people are wondering is, does this open the door for J.J. Watt to make his return to the Texans? Personally, it's a little too early for me. I think JJ, because of his age, he's 35, and because of his long injury history, I would prefer that JJ come back mid-season, kind of like Ndamukong Suh did a couple of years ago. Come in fresh, stay healthy for the second half of the season or less, and then hopefully make a playoff run. It will clear up some cap space, which could be used to sign J.J. Watt at some point. Not that the Texans really need it, but it makes it a little bit more comfortable if they have to negotiate it all. And whichever compounding pharmacy or potentially shady doctor, I have no idea, that cost Denico Autry $4 million potentially can perhaps have to defend themselves in a civil suit. That's what the hell I would sue the hell out of every. I'm not litigious either. I would sue the hell out of them for this. But so far, the defensive line in Texans camp, as expected from the big name guys like Will Anderson and Danielle Hunter, those guys have played like you would have expected. The defensive tackle position has been very competitive. Mario Edwards and Foley Fatukasi in particular have looked really good. And they have multiple guys who can rush on the inside in nickel situations, who are both defensive ends and defensive tackles on the roster. But Denico Autry was the initial guy before Danielle Hunter entered the picture who was going to be one of those impactful players for the Texans. So this is a loss, but it's a loss for 6 games. And presumably the Texans will have his services for 11 regular season games after that. I'm Seth Payne, played for the Texans. I'm out there every day at training camp, and I put out a whole lot of Texans content. So please like, subscribe, and maybe this thing will turn out for the better, but I wouldn't hold your breath on it. It's very rare that these are overturned.